Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. For years, journalist Maria Hinojosa has focused on telling the untold stories of Americans of varied ethnic, religious, and economic backgrounds, and chronicling the achievements of some of the nation's unsung heroes. In her weekly radio series, Latino USA, on National Public Radio, she has examined how the nation's population is changing. And she was executive producer and anchor of America by the Numbers, The New Deciders, a PBS special that looks at the emerging groups of voters that are likely to have an impact on this year's elections. Maria has seen the changing faces of America, and we'll talk about what she discovered in this half hour. Welcome.
Hey.
The theme of America by the Numbers seems to be that because of significant demographic shifts that have occurred in recent decades, emerging groups have acquired more political power, and some old groups are voting in different ways. So let's talk about some of those groups. Now, African Americans for a long time were the largest minority voting group in the country. Are they still?
Well, yes, and they are voting actually extraordinarily, Sheryl. It's not really extraordinary, it's to be expected. They're outpacing white voters in terms of their participation rates. Young African American voters in a state like North Carolina, for example, hugely engaged. And at the same time, and some question whether or not it was in response to this, you see North Carolina trying to create one of the strictest voting ID laws that they've ever seen. Was that in response to this high turnout from African American youth voters? We don't know. But clearly, The New Deciders, which is the title of our PBS special, was really about looking at, what some people might think as small groups, but actually they carry tremendous potential. Latino evangelicals, Arab American Muslim voters in Ohio, African American voters in a state like North Carolina, and Asian American voters in Southern California. And that's basically, those are the four groups that we decided to look on.
Right. Now, and it was very interesting, to learn that the rate of voter turnout among African Americans exceeds that of whites. And of course, part of that was the Barack Obama influence. They really turned out for him. African Americans have traditionally voted Democratic, and that has not changed. But the issues that concern them most have changed.
Right. You know what was fascinating, Sheryl, is that we did, for this PBS special, we went to North Carolina. It's a hugely important state in terms of the presidential election. And we were in Greensboro. Some of your viewers might remember the Greensboro Five. Those were American citizens who were shot dead in the middle of a nonviolent protest by actually white racists in the town. It's where the Woolworths protests started in terms of the lunch counter protests. So Greensboro has a long history of political activism, and the young African Americans who we found there were deeply engaged politically, both creating Black Lives Matter in Greensboro and in North Carolina, and on the Republican side. We found the youngest Republican delegate to the North Carolina GOP convention. And you would think, Sheryl, that these politically engaged young people would be encouraging and flocking to the polls in November. And they're not necessarily. They're saying we do politics a different way.
Even though they're out there doing the Black Lives Matter demonstration?
They're saying the politics that matter for us, you're trying to tell us that presidential politics and electoral politics are the only ones that matter. And what we're saying is that our politics, our engagement on the local level as activists is as important. And, on the Republican side, young Marquise, who's 20 years old, basically was saying, look, I'm a Republican activist, but I can't vote for Donald Trump. And on the Black Lives Matter side, they were saying, we're actively engaged, but we have issues with the candidate. Whether or not they've changed this close to the election, we'll see. But when we were filming them early in the summer, they were like, we're not sure if any of us are going to actually go to the polls.
Very interesting. The millennials, 18 to 34, the largest generation in history. They're now voting generation in history, and they now outpace Baby boomers, how did that happen? How did that happen? We're now number 2. So what impact are they having on electoral politics? 51% say they are independents. Are they politically are they politically involved? But you seem to be saying yes, but in different ways.
You know, and I am so blessed, Sheryl, that I have traveled to all 50 states. And just in this year, I don't even know the number of cities, but just in the fall, I've probably done maybe 15 to 18 different cities. And here's what I find. I find perhaps what the polls don't exactly get at, which is that it's very mixed. I find young people who are incredibly engaged and, completely committed to electoral politics and absolutely I'm going to vote. I find young people who say, yeah, I'm not going to vote. I'm just not, I'm out. I haven't found a lot of young people, actually, this is interesting. I have not found a lot of young people who are across the country who are talking about supporting Donald Trump, but I have seen them on college campuses. So it's not kind of the working class young white American who I hear saying they endorse Donald Trump. It's actually happening on college campuses where they're endorsing Donald Trump. So I think, like all of us, this is a period of extraordinary change. And we don't know how it's going to shake out. I mean, it's fascinating. As journalists, our profound curiosity, what incredible stories to tell. I want to know about that 13 to 17% of Latino voters that would endorse and vote for Donald Trump. Who are they?
Yeah.
Who are they?
And the millennials, I mean, they have a different set of issues. You talked about the Black Lives Matters, but there's also, I guess, the LGBT thing, the transgender thing is probably a big issue among young people as well.
And also the issue of unequal treatment by law enforcement.
Oh, definitely. But that's what Black Lives Matter is all about.
But when I say that, I'm actually thinking about Latino and Asian and Native American young people engaging on the issue that Black Lives Matter has brought to the forefront. I was recently at the Standing Rock protests on the reservation in North Dakota, which is really hard to get to and which raises all kinds of questions in terms of what that protest looks like. There were Black Lives Matter activists there protesting, but the statistic is that actually Native Americans have the highest rate of being shot by police officers in our country. So there are all kinds of relationships that have to be brought forward. And I do think that both things are happening, Sheryl. On the one hand, a lot of engagement by young people, and on the other hand, there's almost like we're out. Like I don't want to use the term "it's rigged," but we're not included in the process.
Right.
So both
it
things
doesn't
happening.
matter. It's not going to make any difference.
Right.
Which is sort of traditionally what you've had from young people. Arab Americans, only 1% of eligible voters nationally, and I was surprised to find that the census defines them as white Arab Americans. Now, they have traditionally been conservative, but then after 9/11, you got this shift, and now twice as many Arab Americans identify with Democrats than with Republicans. So what does this mean?
So we went to Cleveland, Ohio, which has the 8th largest Arab American population in the country. It's about 2% of the population of Ohio. So people might say, 2%? Barack Obama won the state of Ohio by just around 2%. That's why 2% matters. You're exactly right. These are Arab Americans categorized as white by the census, more politically conservative. 9/11 happens, George W. Bush happens, the Patriot Act happens, the registration of Muslim immigrants happens, and they turn away like this from the Republican Party. So what we saw in Cleveland was that at the mosque on Friday nights, they're doing voter registration every single Friday after prayer. And people were signing up because Islamophobia, what they're feeling, is being used by young people to say, that's why you have to vote.
Right.
That's why you have to vote this time. So that's going to be a fascinating story.
And you have all this Islamophobia that's just free floating, and then you have Donald Trump, who's encouraging it.
Right. And so we were in the largest mosque in the state of Ohio, and we were at a diner 5 minutes away from the largest mosque in the state of Ohio, a diner filled with white Ohio voters who have neighbors who are Arab American and Muslim American. When we interviewed them, about half of them said they were going to vote for Trump. And when I said, but what about your Muslim and Arab neighbors? And they said, he doesn't really mean it when he says those things, and that would never happen here. But for the Muslim and Arab voters, I think they're thinking, we have to vote to make sure that that doesn't happen here.
Do you have Arab Americans more actually running for political office, trying to get engaged at that level?
Well, we found the only Egyptian American running for office. She is running for a judgeship in Ohio. And she ran once and lost by a small percentage point. And what motivated her to come back and run again was actually the Islamophobia that she experienced the first time. She said, I cannot let this turn me away from getting engaged in politics. The Islamophobia I'm feeling has got to make me become more engaged, and I've got to win.
You've got 27 million Latinos who are eligible to vote. And they have traditionally voted rather conservatively, correct? Is that changing?
Well, this is a fascinating group of people, right? Latinos, I think, in terms of the kind of small business, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, we're going to make our American dream, we're immigrants, we fend for ourselves, do fall into what used to be somewhat conservative. They also believe very much firmly in the role of government. Right? So that's why the issue of where Latino voters end up is interesting. And also we're complex, right? We're not just one thing. But in terms of Donald Trump, I think that what he has done is really solidified, again, like the Arab American voters, the turning away from the Republican Party.
With the anti-immigrant
With the anti-immigrant, with the anti-Mexican, with the anti-women. You might say whatever you want in terms of, Latino and make generalizations about a macho culture, pero hay una cosa que se llama respeto. There's something that is respect, and respect for women. And not just those who are your mothers or your daughters. There is a kind of respect, and what Donald Trump has brought into this election, I think, will turn away those voters, those evangelical voters who are Latinos. And, where to the Republican Party? That's my concern, is that if you have these groups turning away from the Republican Party, what is the future of the Republican Party? And by the way, I'd like to think that an active democracy has more than just one viable party.
We're going to take a short break, then we'll be back with more with Maria Hinojosa after the following message. Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with journalist Maria Hinojosa, anchor and executive producer of Latino USA, a national public radio. So we were talking about the Latinos who support Donald Trump. What percentage again?
Anywhere from 13 to 17, and there was a high of maybe 23 at one point.
So why do you think they're supporting Trump?
Well, the Latino voters who I've interviewed talk a lot about party. So they support the Republican Party. So they basically are going to fall into line with the Republican Party. So this was before the kind of, Donald Trump turning away from the Republican Party.
That generally the Republican values are in line with their values.
And actually I'm talking like party. Like, this is my party.
Oh,
I'm going to
okay.
vote for the party because I'm going to vote for the party. Like, I've been a member of the party, and that. I found some Latino Trump supporters who were, a police officer, likes his kind of law and order. I think I've met Latino and Latina business owners who see Donald Trump and they see a great business owner. But I am fascinated by this part of the electorate, Sheryl, to be honest with you. Whatever happens with this election and the outcome, I want to learn more about who those Latino voters are, who would see themselves reflected in the Donald Trump candidacy. Because no matter what happens, the people who support Donald Trump and his views are not going anywhere.
Right.
They're a part of our country, just as I have always said, these immigrants that you want to massively deport, We're not going anywhere. So we've got to figure this out. And that's my challenge as a journalist.
You also have a lot of Latino evangelicals. Evangelicals are now 30% of all Americans, and many of them are Latinos. So on the one hand, you have the evangelical aspect of Latinos that's certainly leaning to the right, oppose abortion, same-sex marriages, and then you would have the pro-immigrant strain of Latinos, you would think be leaning to the left. So it's like, what can you expect from them in this coming election?
We have no idea. I was fascinated to go deep into Latino evangelical dynamic. We focused on Latino evangelicals in Central Florida. I call the Latino voters in Central Florida the most powerful Latinos in the world. The Puerto Rican voters who have moved there from here or from the island, the most powerful Puerto Ricans in the world, because they can shift the state of Florida. And the state of Florida, frankly,
so important.
You know, Donald Trump cannot win without it.
Yeah.
Hillary could win without it, but she needs it as well. Latino evangelicals, they're complex voters like the rest of us. So yeah, they are very much anti-abortion, anti-same-sex marriage. They're very much for total immigration reform, a path to citizenship, humanitarian treatment of them, an increase in the minimum wage, the role for government. So where will they go? The particular evangelical group that we focused on were very clearly anti-Trump. And the pastors, Jeanette and Gabriel Salguero, gave the lasting spiritual speech at the Democratic National Convention. So will they vote Democratic? We don't know. 1 in 6 Latino voters is evangelical. So again, I think it's going to be the story of the election. What happened in Central Florida? What happened with Latino evangelical voters?
Asian Americans, the fastest growing ethnic group in the U.S. That surprised me because I thought Latinos were the fastest growing ethnic group in the U.S. But they're a small group behind in terms of voting, behind whites. Well, they're a small group in terms of numbers, and they've also lagged behind in their voting. So how and where are Asian Americans' influence being felt in politics?
So interestingly, again, for the Republican Party, this is a real moment of reckoning. When you're looking at the numbers, the data, and remember our PBS special is called America by the Numbers, the data is showing that Asian American voters are turning towards the Democratic Party at a faster rate than they are towards the Republican Party. So already in this program, Sheryl, we've talked about Latino, African American, and Asian American voters turning away from the Republican Party. So again, what is the viability of that party? Now, interestingly, in Southern California, used to be Ronald Reagan territory in Orange County, the Republican Party is actually working really deeply with Asian American women voters and putting them on the ticket, and actually they're winning. So the face of the Republican Party in Southern California, which used to be Ronald Reagan Republican area, is now the face of Asian American women. But will that be able to carry the future of the Republican Party nationally? I think this is what we're going to see play out over the next 8 years. Will the Republican Party start looking and saying, wow, we really do need to change the face of the Republican Party? Will it be led by Asian American women? We'll see.
All of this certainly makes candidates who are running for office, makes campaigning a lot more complicated. People who are running for office have to sort of court more constituencies that they did in the past, address different issues, and it certainly makes it harder to make, as we said, make predictions about which candidates are likely to win. What surprised you the most as you traveled around the country and met with people from these different groups?
What surprised me the most? I don't know if I would say that I was surprised by it, but I was born in Mexico. When we came to this country, my father was the only one who was an American citizen. He worked at the University of Chicago as a medical doctor and researcher. And later we became citizens in my family's home, in our home. And so for me, civic engagement, participation has always been really important. I mean, I had to pledge my allegiance to this country. So what was encouraging was the amount of activism that I saw. in different ways. Maybe not what you're seeing on the front page of our newspapers or in the headline of, whatever digital news that you're reading or seeing, or maybe it's not the headline on Twitter. But people are engaged. And I loved seeing that. I love seeing that engagement that is happening. Not everybody is participating, but where they are, it's deep and it's thoughtful. And that was encouraging. I think perhaps what was surprising to me was, at the same time, the kind of level of disengagement, the kind of, if we don't vote, it doesn't matter. A kind of, in the terms of, in the sense of white voters, kind of like, we'll vote for Donald Trump even though we don't really agree with everything that he says, but we're going to vote for him. So there's also this, a lot of these white voters said that they didn't even like Donald Trump, but that they were going to vote for him anyway. So you've got deep engagement on the one hand, and this also kind of passivity that's surprising to me. Not so surprising, but worrisome.
Of the power shifts that you have seen, I'm talking about in political power and voting power among the new deciders, which do you consider the most significant?
I hate to make predictions, but I think that the Latino voters of Florida are going to be a big story. Latino voters in Florida particularly, and then I think that will kind of be seeing Latino voters across the country. And I think even though they're a small segment of the population, I do think that Arab American voters are going to be a part of the story as well. In states like Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, maybe even Virginia.
Because that's where they're concentrated.
Yeah, that's where they're concentrated.
Of course, this has been a very unique campaign, and the factors that would normally draw certain voting groups to one party or the other have been distorted by the fact that by who the presidential candidates are, and as you said, by the fact that a lot of voters don't like Hillary Clinton and a lot of voters don't like Donald Trump. And if you look at his antics, he's alienated a lot of people who might normally have been voted Republican.
Right. There's, I think that there's also a conversation about the role of media in all of this, in terms of the candidacy of Donald Trump and what happened with the story of Donald Trump's candidacy and his treatment by the American media, as well as the treatment of Hillary Clinton and her candidacy and her treatment of the American media. I don't want to make generalizations because I think that this is actually a conversation that we as journalists need to be having internally and externally. Hillary Clinton has been around for a long time, and I'm going to treat her like I treat every politician. I'm going to be incredibly hard on her and ask her difficult questions. But if you compare kind of the reporting on Hillary Clinton, there is, in fact, a misogynistic kind of, in my view, if you just look at kind of without emotion, I think that we would probably see that trend. And I think in terms of the conversation with Donald Trump, a lot of people had a problem, Sheryl, with the fact that early on, a journalist like me could say what Donald Trump is saying is being considered hate speech in the Mexican Latino immigrant community. And people were like, how can you say that about a presidential candidate? A year and a half later, some of the mainstream media has come around to saying, wait a second, what happened here? So we have to have a conversation about our role in politics.
As you pointed out, a lot of Americans are very pessimistic about the state of politics in the country today. Does the fact that we have all of these new deciders wielding political power in different ways make you less pessimistic about where the country is headed? I know what your answer is.
Of course it makes me less pessimistic because they're engaged. I mean, I guess what makes me sad, Sheryl, is the fact that we had to have an election and a candidacy that became so contentious that the engagement of these new deciding groups became irrefutable. It's almost like we had to be deeply insulted in order to be woken up and say to ourselves, we're Americans. We have a stake in this. We have to own our power. We have to own our vote, which is essentially, in all the media that we produce on Latino USA, on NPR, America by the Numbers, on PBS, In the Thick, which is our political podcast dedicated to journalists of color. What we are saying is that we have to dive in, we have to own our voice, we have to own our power. And so these demographic groups are doing it. And sadly, were they motivated by fear, by threats, by being excluded or threats of exclusion? Yeah. But so be it. That's American.
At least they're motivated, and that's a good thing.
And that's American history, and we're part of it.
You visited a lot of communities where these emerging groups are. Do you plan to return to them after the election to see what they did and how they impacted on the election?
Absolutely. We're going to be reporting on that both on NPR, on Latino USA, where, we do multimedia. So the PBS version of America by the Numbers ended up on our NPR program, Latino USA. So we'll go back. We're a small nonprofit media company. We don't have huge travel budgets. We raise all of the money for what we do ourselves. And I see that even that, Sheryl, as my role as a Latina journalist who's running her own nonprofit media company, it's a challenge, but I see it as part of my civic duty. So I do it with love.
Well, we certainly live in interesting times politically, and so we're going to see. We'll know soon.
We will. Thank you, Sheryl. Thank you for all your work.
We're out of time. I want to thank Maria Hinojosa, journalist and president and CEO of Futuro Media Group. Am I pronouncing it right?
Futuro Media Group.
Futuro, for joining me today. Check your radio listings for Latino USA, a national public radio, and you can go to the pbs.org website to find the latest edition of America by the Numbers. For the City University of New York and 1 to 1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. If there are any people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.